Perfect. Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you so much. And we will see you back on stage for the audience Q&A segment at the end of the panel. So if anybody in the chat has any questions for her, feel free to put those in. So now you can please welcome to the stage Sheila Subramanian, Vice President of the Future Forum, Chris Junqueira, VP of Total Rewards at Global Corporate Productions at Bungie, and our moderator, Maricela Herrera, VP of Operations and Strategy here at Ellevate Network.
Maricela, I think you're muted.
Of course, I'm the one to do that. If of anyone today, it would have been me. I just wanted to say to Megan first off that you've done an amazing job, Megan. You've been a star all day as an RMC, so just wanted to recognize that. Thanks, Sharon, for setting the stage for this discussion. Sharon will be back with us for Q&A, so if you have questions for her, please pop them in the chat or the Q&A function. Sheila, Chris, so happy to be here with you. And, we had a prep call earlier this week, so I know this discussion is going to be quite fun. And it's a topic that I know for me, it's very near and dear to my heart. It's what are we doing with the future of work? Sheila, I know you wrote a book about it. Where are we going? So I'd like to just jump right in, and I'll start with Sheila. So Sharon was talking about the Great Resignation, and in our conversation earlier this week, we both acknowledged we kind of see it with a twist. I see it as the Great Reshuffle. You talked about the Great Rethink, but the reality is, just as Sharon said, large changing trends in the workforce. 2 in 3 people are making changes in their careers. What do you think is driving this, and what is it that employees really want from the companies they work for?
Yes, happy to answer that. And I am a co-founder of the Future Forum, which is a consortium that's backed by Slack. So my job is to study this, and it's been really fulfilling over the last couple of years to understand what's changing and what's not in terms of employees' expectations for work. So what we're seeing from our research is that flexibility in where and when you work ranks second only behind compensation when it comes to determining job satisfaction. And 71% of employees globally who don't feel satisfied with the flexibility that their employer offers is open to looking for a new job in the next year. And so that's why I like to frame the Great Resignation really as the Great Rethink. Because what we're seeing is that prior to the pandemic, I was one of these people thinking about how does my life fit into my work? Work dominated one person's workday in terms of the commute, in terms of being in the office full time, in terms of commuting home, and rushing to make dinner for your family or for those around you. And now what we're seeing is the question of how does work fit into my life? How can I live the most fulfilling life and do the best job as I can as an employee? And so much of that comes down to flexibility and ultimately the choice of when you work, where you work, and ultimately how you work. And that choice also comes down to trust, because basically what we're seeing is that employees want to be treated like adults. They don't want to be monitored by their employer in terms of how often they're coming into the office or how quickly they're responding to a message. So this is requiring a fundamental change in how we manage and lead employees moving forward.
That's so interesting. Flexibility being something that was touted in the past, but in the last 2 years, we've gone from work-life balance to work and life are in the same place at the same time, and we have no option. Chris, when we talk about, this panel a little bit is also about well-being and how we care for our employees. And do you think there are areas of the self that are more important to focus on as we, like flexibility, like time away, or, we talked about throughout the day about mental health or diversity and inclusion. So are there things that matter more in your mind, in your opinion?
That's a great question. First, kind of pleasure to be here with you and Sheila. Really looking forward for this great conversation. But they may be different for me, for you, for me in different stages of my career as well. And I think kind of the most important thing for us is to first understand what is the most important thing for me in my well-being. And assessing and making sure that you have a good clarity on the stage that you are, and make it transparent, have that conversation about it with the company that you're about to join or with your current leaders as well. But what I have experienced kind of through my life is that my well-being, my expectation of what well-being would look like in different stages of my life are totally different. When I was young, I want to be busy, I want to be challenged, I want to be growing, I want to be seeking for the next, and it was my well-being was very self-driven. Now at the stage that I am, it's absolutely different. It's a lot more focused on health and balance. My well-being state is totally connected to my family well-being state, so it's not self-driven anymore. So I think the most important thing is figure out what it is that is in there for you, that you are looking for, and then chasing, and make it transparent for the people that are around you, in your work, in your family as well, because that support will help us to achieve that kind of faster and maybe better as well.
Yeah, so very much self-awareness, but I hear that comes back to trust too, which Sheila was talking about, right? Like, be able to be transparent and share what it is that is important to you.
Absolutely. And I think kind of, that connection as well. What Sheila brought, flexibility and trust and things like that. What I think people are looking for now is to a trustful connection, to bring that bridge, to build that bridge, to be heard, to being able to listen as well, and to build that connection with the companies. And this reshuffling or great resignation, or whatever we want to call it, I think is people pursuing that purpose and going after that connection there for a better balance as well.
Sheila, have you seen purpose and connection to leaders be part of what you're seeing at the Future Forum?
Yeah, I agree with Chris in terms of one, figuring out what works best for them in terms of their own well-being, but so much of it also comes from the guardrails that leaders set from the top. And that's actually a chapter in the book, is the importance of setting guardrails, because oftentimes boundaries are self-imposed, and younger employees of color, they don't necessarily feel like they have the ability to set boundaries when they're in a work environment where people are always on. So it's really critical for leaders to set those guardrails in terms of what is the behavior, what is the culture that we want to see. But I'd say more importantly, they actually model it. One thing we encourage executives to think about is, rather than being the first one back in the office, be the last one back in the office as you talk about building a flexible work culture. Another thing is with flexibility in when you work. I, for example, pick up my kids from school and oftentimes work late at night because that's when I work best. Utilizing tools like scheduled send really makes a difference, so that, you could say, my employees, please don't respond when I'm sending you this message at 10 p.m. at night. But most people will, or most people will feel like they need to respond. And so the importance of using new features like, hey, scheduling when you're sending that email or that message within these hours is also a good signal to send as a leader. So boundaries are important, but guardrails are important, equally important, so that basically employees can see that this is valued in the culture based on executive behavior.
And that is so true. And I if you allow me a comment there,
Of course.
I think kind of that trust and that connectivity cannot go one way only, right? Kind of the being open to also understand that, I'm going to receive an email from my leader late in the night, and I will feel okay to respond early in the morning as well. And having, the both ways will facilitate a lot in that connection, a lot in that in that next step of trust, in feeling that it's okay as well, because while I need to operate here, my leader needs to operate here, and that doesn't mean that I need to be there all the time as well.
Yeah, I'm just, this is a good conversation. I think
This is what we want.
We're talking about bringing your whole self to work. So much of leadership, at least what I learned early in my career, is you have all the answers and you are professional and put together at all times. And what we've seen in the last 2 years is that people want to see people bring their employees as well as their employers bring their whole selves to work. Early in the pandemic, when I at the time I had a 1 and a 3-year-old, now they're a bit older. On my status message, I said, working these hours and then chasing unicorns with my kids, or looking for butterflies, and tried to make it a little bit more approachable. And I got notes from my employees saying, thank you for showing that it's okay. And ultimately, all I was doing was that showing like it was okay to be human and that we're all trying to figure this out. But it really marked a shift in terms of what employees expected from their leaders, but also how leaders should show up. And one last point, what we see from our research is that employees who don't feel like their leaders are being transparent and with that vulnerable are 4 times more likely to look for a new opportunity in the next year. So as we're thinking about the great rethink, the great resignation, transparency and vulnerability are a big part of that in terms of how to lead moving forward.
I feel like we've been hearing about vulnerability, authenticity in leadership for a long time, but we're finally actually seeing it a little bit more. I do think, of course, I'm going to say this, but I do think it's a little bit gendered. And I do think that women have that EQ that can show up a little bit more. I love the chasing unicorns. My Slack status many times throughout the day is going for a run before the sun goes down. And it makes a difference. I mean, we've heard of a lot of, benefits, perks, companies that have 4-day work weeks, or, in the UK, I'm actually now in London, and in the UK, we had 70 companies are going to start with that trial, just announced like 2 days ago. And then we have companies, what was very common, unlimited vacation. But at the end of the day, is this really true? Like, if we are seeing that employees want more time away from their companies, how are we making these policies actually work for them? Because the unlimited vacation kind of has been always a not real thing.
That's a very good one, right? And I will continue with that phrase that it will be different for different individuals. And I'm going to give you an example at home. I have a son who is 20 years old, and during the pandemic, they were having classes from my house, and I was there. And one day he turned to me, "Mom, I never want to work from home." Kind of, what? That's what I'm hearing, all the opposite, and I'm working on the opposite direction of this. But when we think it not necessarily means the same for my daughter that's 21 years old, and she wants to be more closer kind of to home and works more from home. And that conversation about what is my expectation in terms of what makes sense for me is more be further away from the office, be closer to the office, have more vacation days, less vacation days. It will vary, and that's why the dialogue, it's so important. So important. We see absolutely a trend of, I want to have that flexibility. I want to be more from home, and when I need to be as well. Not necessarily that I don't want to be in the office with team members and things like that. But the voice that I hear is, more flexibility. The way we build here is we are definitely not on the state of the art, nor leading the market here at Bangladesh, but we are on a hybrid space. So employees in most of our office can choose, which days they want to work from home, which days they want to work from the office. Some office with 2, some office with 1, some office with positions that went straight for home. But it really, let the dialogue flow. Listen to what you need. Talk about what you need. Talk with your leaders. Make sure you have that safe and comfortable space to do so as well. So the very first step of a change is that conversation, right? Is when you express and you bring it to the knowledge of your leader of what is expectation as well.
How would you start that?
I think kind of as thinking as leaders in companies is really making sure that we have a comfortable and safe environment for that to open. But let's say that in this morning I heard something very interesting, that sometimes we need to join our companies where they are in order to push the transformation. And it starts with the first conversation with, here is, my aspirations. And a lot of times it starts as us as employees doing the very first step. Because I have been in the market for almost 30 years now, right? I don't think in my entire career I have faced a leader that would not talk with me and hear what I had to say and what my needs were. And I would say very few times I faced leaders that would not join me where I needed at that stage in my career as well. So, being vulnerable and getting ready for that conversation, and, without the expectation that's going to happen the next second, but the expectation that it's going to make things progress, and we will see evolution with that conversation as well. So I would say starts with us.
It's a partnership.
Mm-hmm.
Sheila?
Yeah, it's interesting. I love this dynamic, Chris, because I'm talking oftentimes about like what leaders need to do better, and I like your perspective on what employees need to do as well. Because what we're seeing from our research is that 2/3 of executives are actually not including their broader employee base when it comes to return to office, future of work planning. And the reason why that's concerning is because, at least in the US, 2/3 of execs are white males. And we're seeing a lot of examples of the focus group of one. And as a result, what we're seeing is there's a disconnect between executive principles that they're setting and employee desires. So it's really important for leaders to actually get feedback beyond the quarterly survey in terms of bringing people to the table who are representative of your community, representative of the population you're serving, the population you're addressing, or versus those who are closest to the CEO. So that's the first area. I think the second thing that's important to note is that the 4-day work week is not going to work if you don't actually fundamentally redesign what work looks like. You're just basically cramming 5 days of meetings into 4 days of meetings, which is going to burn people out, and they're going to spend their Fridays catching up. In addition, if leaders don't embrace this 4-day work week, then they're going to be writing messages, sending emails, adding comments on that Friday, and everyone else is going to feel forced to do the same. So it's really important for us to not think about Band-Aids with regards to how we work, but redesign even just how we measure success and performance. Because so much of performance historically has been, Sheila, you're the first in, last to leave. You're the hardest worker. You deserve to get promoted, without actually examining the impact, the results that it actually drove. And so I think a big part is shifting how we measure performance from this person's so good because they're in the office all the time, or they respond to my email at midnight, to this person has actually made an impact on our business measured by X, Y, and Z. And that's going to require a lot of investment, but it's the only way we're going to have this flexible work model work, especially in a more equitable way.
100%. And you're so right? A panelist earlier today said, described some of our leaders, and we were talking about VCs as male, pale, and stale. And I feel like it kind of applies here too. If we're only looking at a certain subset of the population, that's why we've heard or we've read how can flex work be the new mommy track? Will it impact minorities more? Because you might be someone who has been socialized or culturized to stay back, be more quiet, keep your head down. And that is very, very different when it comes to results. That should not matter.
Yeah, that's something that keeps me up at night, because I, for one, am not going back into the office full time. And I've discovered my voice over the last 2 years and realized how broken the system was. And I've realized this is just a more productive and a happier way of working and being a parent and being a spouse and a daughter. Like, I feel fuller than I ever have before. But a big piece of this, and the challenge that I see is I want everyone back in the office so I know that they're working. Or, we've heard that everyone get back to work after 2 years. And it's like, what have we been doing all this time? So much of this has to be stemming from the initiative of leaders to reevaluate what career progression looks like, what outcomes look like. And what we see from our research is that the reason why many people want to leave their jobs is, one, flexibility, but two, they don't feel like they're on the career track, or they don't feel like they're on the right path within their organizations. So if you don't necessarily re-examine how you're promoting people and how you're rewarding the impact that they're making, you risk losing those employees to other organizations.
Yeah. And I think it's happening, right? I think all of us are happening, even if you are re-examining it, because there is a gap between the wanting and being able to make, and there is a gap or a balance. And I'm always kind of preaching with kind of, we will need to find the balance here, because it may be that it's not all to the right and all to the left as well. When we were returning to the office, we put a focus group to work on the policy, on the guardrails, but obviously in the light of our leadership expectation as well. And it's just the beginning of our journey there. It was the beginning, and it started smaller. Now it's making more progress in different countries, pushing different ways, but at least having that voice there and in understanding, what's the expectation of the company. And especially, we are a manufacturing company. We're a strong kind of trading floor. So we cannot take out of the environment all those two components as well. But how can we make sure that we reach a balance that we can deliver to the work from home, deliver to being at the office where we need to be at the office as well, and through the dialogue too.
So I've been thinking throughout this conversation a lot on what you said, Chris, of, you have to know what is right for you, and that will change at certain times in your life. And that's, I 100% agree with that. I promised I would bring this up to one of our attendees earlier today, because they were asking about this in a session earlier, which is, in the last, I don't know, couple months, it hasn't been that long that I've been seeing at the research and looking at this data, but about a quarter of women experiencing menopause say they aren't getting enough support at work to cope with their symptoms. And 18% are thinking of quitting over it, which is a big group. And if you think about it, there's a shift in the demographics of the workplace, but we are also have been faced with ageism and other inequitable treatment. What can companies do to support employees as they're going through this life stage?
As I was reading that, I thought, oh my gosh, I missed that opportunity as I went through menopause recently, right? But, I think it goes back to have that open floor for that conversation. And I'm sure that there were days that kind of, I did talk with my leader with something that was going wrong, that I had to do this or do that and things like that. But really making sure that we are operating in a safe space where the dialogue can happen. Because I'm 100% sure that past generations would be absolutely ashamed to talk about, I'm going through menopause, I have those heat waves and my hormones are imbalanced and things like that. So everything that we have been doing here is kind of thinking, how can we make sure that we not only open that space for the dialogue, but we open where people feel comfortable in talking about it, and that it doesn't even become a taboo, to be honest with you. I didn't even have to rethink if one day I'm not feeling well and I need to stay at home because of this or that. Doesn't matter the reason why, right? But really open the dialogue. And I would challenge if how much of that, not even starting that conversation from the employee side is generational as well. Because as I look through how I deal with things in my career and how my kids deal with things in their career is absolutely different. Kind of, that hierarchical and that things that I would never think about talking, and now they talk out of the batch, and this generation is really expecting more dialogue, more support, more transparency, and so forth as well. So have you thought about what you need, and have you talked with your leaders about it as well, instead of just growing that thought process of just quitting? Have you tried to stay as well, right?
Yeah, I think, and on the other side of it, in terms of even being a leader, traditional leaders have been gatekeepers. They've been the ones saying, are you getting the work done? Or are we hitting all of our numbers? Or what's blocking you? Let me unblock you. And what we're seeing from our data is that most managers, like middle managers, are struggling across all elements of experience because they don't know how to lead distributed teams. And they don't necessarily know how to be an empathetic manager and get to know people personally. I can count the number of managers in my career where I'm like, I had true psychological safety, where I could talk about what was happening in my life. I was willing to, I was open to making mistakes. I was open to speaking up, because that's not necessarily been a principle of culture historically. And when we talk about meaning at work, I think psychological safety is a big part of that. It's, yes, bringing your whole self to work, but having the psychological safety to do so and speak up and make mistakes and be able to talk about what you're experiencing personally as well as professionally. I think Brene Brown calls it vulnerability with boundaries. And I really like that phrase because it's not that we're all family. It's that you're able to talk more about your life with some boundaries in place.
Yeah, it's similar to the notion of radical candor with employees, right? Like care deeply, be open, and have that conversation. I love that you mentioned middle managers. This is something that I think about a lot. I think most new managers, we're all thrown in there kind of to the wolves, so to speak, figure it out. And what can middle managers, I mean, at the end of the day, you're the one leading a team. You're the one that has a big impact within that team, and that team then has big impact within that company. So there is power there. How can we build more psychologically safe environments for our teams?
We're talking a bit about benefits here. And I think that coaching is one area that is oftentimes overlooked. I think every manager should have a coach. For me, I've had a coach for over 10 years. It's like my version of self-care every week. Being able to talk to somebody who understands me, but also is outside of the situation and can work with me through it. I think that's one area. I think another is structured feedback. We write about that a lot in the book. Giving feedback is hard. Being direct is hard. It's even harder when you're not seeing someone every single day. But you need to give managers a sense of what they're doing well and areas in which they can improve, and talk to their teams as well along the way. And last but not least, it's celebrating the managers who are embracing this new way of working and ensuring that you are modeling what good looks like. Because if you don't have that model for what good looks like, then it's really difficult to figure out what success is. But I would say start with coaching and invest in a coach for people on your team as a way to help them navigate this new way of working and the era of unpredictability that we're currently in.
And another thing that I would just add that we have seen working as well is, allow them almost to those support groups, right? Kind of what other managers are experienced as well. And by sharing with peers, and they can learn from each other as well. Because there is so much in that, so they can see themselves in the same situation or similar situation. It becomes more real life as well.
I promise I didn't ask Chris to say that, but it is the perfect plug for the Rising Leader Roundtables we host at Ellevate, or I host at Ellevate every Thursday, where this is what we do. We sit there, we talk about what challenges we're facing, how someone else is dealing with it. It's from people from all over the world, from all different industries, but we end up realizing that the challenges we're facing are pretty similar. Mm-hmm. So what a better way to learn that's not going to Google and asking, how do I deal with someone who doesn't?
Absolutely. And yes, she did not ask me to talk about it.
As we're talking about benefits, coaching, for example, and other things, they cost money, right? Like a lot of these things cost money, but retaining employees and keeping an engaged workforce saves money. So what's the rubric business leaders should be using when deciding what to offer their employees? Like and not just in a benefits way, it could be flexibility, for example, or anything else. How do you quantify the ROI of these?
That's a very good question that I think we chase almost every day. But what I have seen throughout my career is that great companies will always be looking in ways to bettering themselves. Always we keep looking at market trends, market practice, and things like that. And we know benefits cost money, but we also know that we only get to what we need with the talents that we have in the companies as well. So it is, that two sides that we will have to balance. I think there is a Harvard research that says that for every $1 that you invest in well-being, you save $6 in absenteeism and in benefits as well. So that the return on investment that is there, it's known that it's there. It's about where do you want to invest your money, on the side of benefits that will treat preventions, kind of well-being and things like that, or do you want to treat the disease later as well? Because the bill will be on your pocket. Doesn't matter where it goes, right? But I think at the end of the day, what the companies continue to do is, that balance about the trends, the market, and also how much money they can allocate to those benefits as well. We have seen a great kind of increase on the well-being side of the things. And I think Sharon mentioned it in the beginning, normally we run the benefits and the health insurance and everything, and then we have the well-being as one tool. But what I from my own usage and from my own experience, I know that I do not use 100% of what's offered inside the companies that I have worked with. There are so many there that we don't tap into, that we don't think about as well. And there are perks, they are there, and absolutely will help us to the future as well. But I think that balance about how much money do I have, and market trends and market practice as well. When you are with great companies, that's normally what they are leveraging and balance. What we see right now in the market as always a lot more of self-serve yourself. Do you want to get this? Do you want to get that? And that's where we need to make sure that we are educated about not only on the now, but what I'm building for the future as well, and making sure that I'm leveraged, because there is a lot there, and most of the great companies there have a menu of options that most of the employees don't use at full capacity as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. And more stats to add to that is like the top 1% of a company generates 20% value add for the organization. And the top quartile of engaged employees generate 50% higher revenue growth for the organization. And think about the people who are in that group. And oftentimes they're not the ones who are making use of the baristas or the foosball tables or the terrarium making classes. So I think that choice is really important, giving people just the flexibility, even in terms of how they want to use the benefits for their own advantage. I always use this anecdote, but I remember reading early in my career about Carolyn Everson, who was an executive at Facebook, and how when she signed on to the company, she said, if I'm going on a business trip for more than 4 days, you're going to pay for a caregiver ticket to bring my kids along. I was like, oh, I could never ask for that. That's just a lot to ask for. But then I had to go to London, which was at least a week-long trip when my daughter was 6 months old. So I asked for a caregiver ticket. And for that extra $1,000 that the company spent, I was able to bring a caregiver along and breastfeed my baby and not feel like I was so far away for 10 days. So it's things like that, just the flexibility in terms of how you're using your benefits, but also giving people the choice in terms of what they value is the key to also driving engagement and loyalty. Because that happened 4 years ago. I still talk about that today. And I've been at the company for nearly 6 years now.
It's interesting you bringing that up as an example, because one of the things we talked about on Monday when we had the call is some of the benefits that were touted a little while ago, shipping breast milk, nannies on planes, all these things. There was this discussion, are they good? Are they positive? Or are they veiled attempts from the company to just squeeze more out of their employees? And how do you really know? Like, what are your thoughts on this? It seems for you it was very positive.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to the choice that Chris was talking about before. If you're being pushed, if your mental health, you're feeling burnt out, you feel like you're being taken advantage of, that's a bigger problem. And no benefit is going to repair that. So I think that it's having the conversation about, like, again, why are we having this meeting in London? And what are the expectations, and how do we make them more equitable, or experience more equitable for those who can't join in person? We weren't really having those conversations before the pandemic. And on an individual level, like, how are you feeling in terms of engagement, in terms of your own feeling of burnout when it comes to your day-to-day job?
Yeah. And I know, I don't know if I'm naive around it, but I can't believe that someone would design those things to make anything bad out of it as well. And I think kind of, opening up that discussion so you also convince yourself that it's not to make sure that we overwork you or to, and how can it be good for me as an employee and for the company as well, because there is a decision making, there is time involved with that, there is investment involved of that, and making sure that your heart's in the right place as well to take that, because if it's not your time to travel, you talk that is not your time to travel, right? And I remember early in my career, my kids were 6 months and a year and a half. And there was this benchmark trip that my leader was organizing. And I kind of, oh, that looks awesome. And I was kind of, why am I not in that kind of discussion yet, right? So one day I talked with him and kind of, Chris, I want you there, but kind of your kids kind of age, they're so little, kind of, if we plan in advance, I can, in that at that time there was not even any support for anything, but if we plan in advance, I absolutely can go to that trip and be part of that benchmark. And it was a 30 days trip. I went, I had family kind of supporting and organizing 5 countries, 30 days. My kids were with my parents and supporting and everything. But for me, it was more important that I would have the opportunity to be in that project than not to be and feel. So what is important. He thought he was taking care of me, and I thought that I was being left out. So it generate that conversation to see what kind of really values on both sides as well.
Yeah, no, I that's an amazing anecdote. Like I can't imagine this in this era of COVID right now, but yeah, it ultimately comes down to like, what are the principles that your leadership organization are setting? What are the behavioral guardrails that they're also exhibiting? And to your point, like you can't have flexibility, you can't have a culture of trust without some level of predictability. If everything is always a fire drill of we need to get on this, it's just not. We need everyone in London next week. It's not equitable, and so leaders need to think about what predictability looks like and actually take the time to plan ahead so that benefits aren't a band-aid, which is kind of the root of your question, Maricela, is benefits are not going to be effective if they're just treated as a band-aid when it's a fundamentally broken way of working and a fundamentally inequitable workplace.
All comes back to trust in so many ways, right? Do you trust the people you're working with? Do you trust the company you're working for? Sheila and Chris and I were talking about how, earlier this week we were talking, the last few weeks or months by now, we've seen tech layoffs, lots of tech companies announce layoffs. And then we've seen some communication blunders around how other companies make those announcements. Elon, Tesla.
No comment.
Right? But, how does it, and we also know that there's a labor shortage. How do these two things fit? And how do you fix that? I guess it's two parts. One is how does the labor shortage and the changing, layoffs and work come, but also how is the trust, can it be rebuilt after something as bad as communicating through a leaked email that, you're going to lay off 10% of your workforce?
There's a lot in that question. I mean, I think
I saved the best for last.
The first thing is that you're not going to gain trust with top-down mandates at your company. We've seen that time and time again, that the leaders who are saying work is the same for everybody based on our policy, so everybody needs to adhere to these rules. They've seen a revolt among their employee ranks. And so a big part of one area here in terms of trust and the great rethink or resignation is empowering your managers to figure out what works best for their teams and training them accordingly. Second, yes, there is a recession that is looming and there's a labor shortage. So if you want to retain your best employees, you need to lead with trust. You need to trust them to do what's right for themselves as well as their organization. And we've seen a lot of this play out in the last couple of years in a successful way. So as a leader, it's trust your employees and also be transparent with them. Bring them along. Say, we're figuring this out. I need your help. Or even, I don't know. because that's what they want to hear from you right now, rather than getting a black box policy that's rolled out, or worse, to your point, Marcella, an email that's leaked to Politico.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are times that, some companies will need to shrink here or shrink there, and those things will happen as well. And I just hope that they do it hard, and they do the same way they would want to be done when it's their time as well. And I think that's kind of when you put the leadership hat, kind of, how do I want to be to feel treated, and when if I was on the other side as well, right? And do like you wanted others to do with you as well.
Yeah. Work needs to become more human, and it is, right?
Mhm.
That's where we're going. You're going to say something, Sheila?
Oh, I just said I hope so. We need to be going in that direction.
Well, so we are kind of running out of time for this panel discussion. I could sit here and chat with you all for hours. But we're going to invite Sharon back on stage so she can join us for Q&A. But I also want to open the floor before that. Sharon, anything that you'd want to add to some of the things we were talking about?
Yeah, just that, I do believe that the trust factor, I was having a conversation with a bunch of my team members, and we have a new CEO. We're very excited. Ellen Cooper, go girl power. Very excited for her. Very qualified, and brings a different angle to business. And it is about caring about people, and people see that, and people don't follow companies, they follow leaders, and that it starts with trust. So I couldn't agree more with everything that you guys have been talking about.
Thank you. Before I go back to, again, I keep saying before, but before we jump into audience Q&A, I have one question that I wanted Sharon to be here for too. Why do you stay? I would love to hear from the three of you. Why do you stay at your companies? That's the name of the panel. That's the name of this conversation.
I stay, and I always stayed because I felt that great alignment between, I wouldn't say my values and maybe the purpose and with the company purpose. I kind of, if I look back in my career, that there was that love for what we do, that love for the people that I worked with, that belief that we were building something for the future as well. So a lot of alignment into my vision of life and the vision of the company as well. But it's a lot about the people that I worked with as well. My leaders, my peers, my teams as well. I think all of us play a big role into each other's reasons why we stay as well.
I would say that I stay, there's a lot of reasons, but there's a very strong culture at Lincoln. It starts with optimism, and that's one of our career competencies is optimism. And behind that also, think of the namesake and the likeness of our company being, former President Abraham Lincoln. You want to talk about an innovator of his time with the greater good. And that is, you feel that working for Lincoln because it's you feel like you have a noble purpose and it's believed all the way from the top down.
And for me, it comes down to trust. I study work in terms of inclusive and flexible work, but I also live it. And it's been wonderful to be able to feel like I am a present parent and a successful employee all in the beat of one day, because I struggled with that before the pandemic. And I was on the road a lot and was constantly feeling like I was working from a place of scarcity rather than abundance. And I can't say that I feel like I'm totally killing it right now, but it feels like I'm operating in a place where I can live my life and be a successful employee, and I can speak up around the issues that matter most to me. Just for the group, I am in COVID quarantine right now. I told my team, was like, I want to be part of this conversation today. It's really important, but I'm not going to have the energy to be available all day. And everyone gets it. It's wonderful to be able to bring my whole self to work and also feel like it's embraced accordingly.
Thank you for rallying.
It's been a lot of fun.
I have a few questions actually from the audience about meaningful work. Someone asks, that's what Gen Z wants. Someone said, you know, how do you foster it? Can we just go into it a little bit and talk about what meaningful work would mean, and how can we make sure that that we can give that to people?
You know, I'll start the conversation. I think it's interesting when I referenced earlier, I have 4 children. My oldest just graduated, is an engineering student, and he had a lot of opportunities that would have paid him a lot of money. And he chose the one where he was going to make a difference. He's a sustainable energy consultant, you know, believing that he needs a planet so that he can thrive, his friends, his family, and ultimately his children one day. You know, so I get to see that through the eyes. They're all Gen Z, my kids. I get to see the world through their eyes. And, you know, I bring that to work. And what we do is meaningful. You think of insurance, you're like, oh God, that's so boring. But in reality, you know, I mean, the claims that we pay, whether it's to a loved one from a life insurance claim or disability or retirement or long-term care, you know, it's a labor of love of what we do. But at the end of the day, to, you know, keep people wanting to work here and whatnot, it goes back to how they feel when they're working, how they're treated, just as much as how they're contributing.
Yeah, I think it comes down to autonomy as well in terms of meaning. What we're seeing is that 2/3 of employees don't feel like they have flexibility in when they work beyond the occasional doctor's appointment. And so I think it's critical in terms of what is the purpose of your work, but it's also how you're working so that you can take your dog for a walk in the middle of the day or work from a new location. It all comes back down to trust and not relying on the outdated ways of which we used to work that are no longer relevant with technology in place.
And the only thing that I think I would add is the alignment between, you know, their life purpose with the company and the job purpose as well. I think this generation is very driven by that. So what do I believe and kind of what I'm going after, and that alignment as well.
This is, Sharon, comes to the point with your son, right? And I love what Sheila you added too about the autonomy, like being able to have that, make some decisions, be treated as an adult. That's how we started the whole conversation.
Yeah, that's the best benefit you can have is to be treated like an adult and be trusted to do your job.
So here's another question. It's great to see the movement to expand parental leave, but how do we better manage the work of someone who is out on leave? It can create tension when team members have to pick up the slack and can put the person taking leave behind their career when they come back to a role that hasn't been done properly for 3+ months.
That's a very good one, and I'm not sure if we have one formula for that. We know for sure that when we are in those discussions at Bungie right now, and we know for sure that there are areas that we as leaders, we also need to drive, you know, the temp work to support that leave, because it does create, I would say, a burden into the organization that it can be super risky on all the sides that you look to. What we have been discussing here is, you know, that decision about do I need or not someone to cover for that, I think can be also, is it an opportunity for someone to be developed as well, right? And I would say if you are going on leave, or if you are staying and someone is going on leave, and if you are not comfortable in the way that's being handled, I think you need to bring that up, and kind of sometimes bringing a temp is the best solution, but sometimes it's not as well. Sometimes giving to someone as a development may be an amazing solution, but it may not make sense in other cases. But again, bring the topic to the table, have that discussion, and figure out what would be the best solution if you are going off or if you are staying, right?
Sheila, Sharon, anyone want to add anything?
I think one thing I would add here is how important it is for both the mom and for both caregivers, for both sets of parents to be able to take leave, and that organization to support that. Because oftentimes the burden does fall on mothers who are returning, because men tend to take their leaves in chunks or not at all. So being able to support both parents in taking leave will normalize what that return to work will look like in a better way than it is today. Because I experienced that myself, and it's not easy to have a young baby and figure out how to fix things when you've been away for several months.
Sharon, I saw you take yourself off mute.
I was just going to say that it is important. I was saying earlier when the last piece of when people say, what's your best piece of advice? It's like, be kind to yourself. And that part of it is you need to take the time, not only to, for each caregiver in the parental situation, whether it's to heal yourself, and sometimes it's mentally as well if you had colicky babies like me. Companies are getting even more progressive with more types of company pay leave. So if you're not a parent, so this is going to be something we're going to have to learn to manage as managers and leaders. And also you're seeing state paid leaves come into play here. So it's not going away. It is about the work-life blending. So we're going to have to figure it out.
And it's not just parental leave, right?
Yeah.
We're in this time where the sandwich generation is growing. Caregiving family leave will be more important.
Yeah, we're in a caregiving crisis with the sandwich generation. It's only going to get worse, especially in the United States. And if leaders don't recognize this as an issue, the labor shortage is going to get worse, as well as what we're going to see is even more women leaving the workforce. So it's a conversation that we need to continue to have in terms of what are some solutions that employers can offer, in my opinion, as well.
I like this question. We're all done with the term resilience. How can companies do a better job at not celebrating it? Even in remote work environments, there is an inherent expectation that everyone always be available since the office is in your home.
So I think I'm the one that mentioned that word earlier, and probably has come up in a number of conversations throughout the day. But
yes,
I actually, when I say resilience too, I have to say it's like in my head, I'm thinking it's exhausting. And I think that's where you're getting it. Being available 24/7 is not sustainable. So resilience in my mind is, and Sheila, you talked a little bit about earlier, whether it's, I have to be more cognizant. My kids are grown. On the weekend, I can be sending off 100 emails to somebody or whatnot. I haven't figured out how to use the scheduler yet on Outlook, so I need to figure that piece out. But I do think that we should be celebrating new ways of working and probably put resilience in the rearview mirror.
Yeah, one thing that we write in the book is core team work hours. So embracing something called the non-linear workday. Because I remember the first few days when we were all in lockdown, I took like 600 steps according to my watch. Like I was in front of the computer the entire time. And the beauty of core team work hours is that you come together as a team and you say, this is when we want to come together on a regular basis to discuss, debate, decide specific topics, develop our employees. Outside of that, you can work and do your focused work when works best for you. So for my team, it's 9 a.m. to 1:30. And that's when we meet together. We have our one-on-ones, we have our team meetings. But outside of that, people have a bit more flexibility. That works well for my team across the time zones I manage. It definitely can be tailored based on a team's needs, a leader's needs. But I think this is an opportunity for us to think about how do we enable people to turn off, starting with our own behavior as leaders.
I love that. I'm gonna absolutely use that one here. And I think my question goes to, do you really need to be available 24/7, or do you feel like you need to be available for 24/7? What are your boundaries? Have you talked about them as well? Because I think the same, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, we were all proud that we were working remotely and, rocking the boat and delivering that. But kind of why was that good at that time? And I think kind of set your boundaries, have that conversation, and make sure that you don't feel like you need to be available 24/7. That's the very first step.
Yeah, and then the flip side, Sheila, you mentioned this, Sharon, I think you mentioned it too before, modeling it from leaders, right? Like putting you also not just talking talk, but showing that you're not going to start the conversation at an odd hour, or you're going to go chase unicorns with your kids at some point. So it goes both ways.
Agreed.
This is a very interesting question that's a little bit different, but I think I'm curious to hear. What is something from your career you wish you could have a do-over for? That's a big
I think
question.
that came from one of my colleagues. She's almost like she's setting me up. I saw it in there. You know what?
She didn't tell me though.
I wish I had a do-over when I was raising my kids, because I tell this story and I laugh at it ironically, but it is a sad statement. So my second oldest, when I went to her preschool graduation years ago, she's 21 now. I show up and the teacher goes, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm Sarah Donahue's mom." She goes, "No, that's Lainey over there." And I'm like, "Oh, great." And so I did reflect on that moment. And I always tell people they know where they need to be. But I will tell you, I felt guilty if I wasn't there. And at times I felt guilty if I was there. And for me, COVID was just so eye-opening that I didn't have a choice but to be present. And so that's where I wish I had my do-over.
Thank you for sharing that.
I love that. I would say for me, it's getting comfortable at saying no more, especially early in my career. I always tell this anecdote of in a prior job, I flew to the Philippines for a 30-minute meeting. And I spent a week of the 4,000 weeks I have in my lifetime traveling to the Philippines for this meeting. The person never even showed up, and I traveled home. And the reason why I use that as an example is that I tried to push back. I tried to say no, say, "Hey, we could use technology. We could use a conference call." But the response was, you need to hustle for your role, so you need to fly out there. And I wish I pushed back on the norms that we've talked about a lot today more, and rather than just accepting them for how they were. Because I know that throughout my career, I've jumped on flights, I've worked crazy hours to be able to play the game. And it's only recently that I realized that success is crafting the game that I want with my life rather than conforming to what I think the game should be. And I wish I learned that earlier in my career.
Success is crafting the game I liked in my life. I could not agree more. That's a great way of putting it. Chris?
Mine is very similar to Sharon as well, especially when the kids were little, kind of a lot of traveling. And I think if I would do something different was figure out a way to not be so jet lagged over the weekends, because I think kind of, that goal and that traveling, it was also part of what I wanted for and what I was driving. But how could I be a little bit more present when I was at home and not working, but I was extremely exhausted because of jet lagging and things like that. But a little bit of how could I have enjoyed a little bit more being present with my kids while I was not at work.
Thank you. Thank you to the three of you for being so open and honest and just having this conversation. I think it's extremely important that we talk about where work is going. It behooves all of us to create a world of work that we want to be a part of, that we want for future generations, that we want to be happy with. It's where we spend a lot of our time. So thank you for all you're doing, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thanks to Sharon and Chris.
Thank
Bye
you,
now.
ladies. Bye-bye.
Megan, I'll pass this over back to you.